we thought it would be a good idea to have a conversation with you, Reverend SeiFu, around just kind of the vibes of people, how people are feeling about the state of SDI these days.
Sounds good to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's see, let's just start with the sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And so some of the feedback we've received, in light of conference conversation is, do I still belong at SDI? Is there still a place for me here? And it's an open question for several of our members. And so how would you respond to somebody who is asking that question of themselves?
Yeah, so I always think of things as not mutually exclusive. Right? Yes, you belong here, if you want to belong here. And sometimes that means growing into your discomfort, growing into your learning edge, right? Not your leading edge, but your learning edge. And living into questions. We've had this conversation many times. Living into questions rather than living into answers. So SDI is a place that welcomes people of all faith traditions and no faith traditions, spiritual orientations. However you phrase your commitment to God, the beyond, the universe, Allah, Tao, Brahman, whatever, if you don't use any of those and you just call it the wind or your higher power, the ground of all being, everyone is welcome. We have rules of engagement, obviously, because every public square needs rules of engagement, which is civil discourse, respectful of differences, willing to engage but not insult, not offend, at least not deliberately or maliciously. Right? It's one thing to make an error and learn from it and rectify, but it's another thing altogether to be deliberately offensive. So those are just some example of rules of engagement. But with all that said, a lot of the topics around privilege and race and diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging are difficult when the rubber meets the road, when you move away from just speaking in generalities and get into the nitty-gritty of what that means. These can be hard conversations, and feelings can be hurt, and wounds can surface. And wounds can surface in all sorts of unexpected ways. And I think that's been happening as much in this organization as it is in every other organization in the world at large right now.
You really, you hit on the metaphor, the public square, and using this for years now to describe what it means to come together as a diverse community of practitioners. We're unified around our calling as spiritual companions, but the ways in which we do that work or the ways in which we feel called can be myriad. And, sticking with that metaphor, the public square, it's noisy. There's lots going on. Everyone's kind of at their own table trying to get your attention. It's messy, it's smelly, it's all of that. And I feel like you've been warning us of that aspect of it for a while, not to be afraid of it, necessarily, but to examine it.
Yeah, and I think that's, I always refer to SDI as a community of deep water swimmers, and it's what happens when you get into deeper waters out of the safety of the shore, out of the safety of splish-splash territory into territory where you can drown, and so you have to be a lot more careful. And this is really an invitation for everybody to jump into the deep end of the pool or the deep end of the ocean or whatever it is. And you can't really do that unless you're properly equipped, right? Unless you know how to swim, or unless you've got a life vest or a boat standing by, or others who are supportive who can pick you up if you start to flail, if you start to have difficulties. So we've entered territory where we've peeled enough layers of the onion back that things are starting to get sticky and difficult. And that's a reconsideration, because it's fine for all of us to get together and feel good about each other. There's nothing wrong with that. Certainly that's a nice thing, to be able to be in a community of like-minded practitioners. But we're also tackling, we've gone beyond that into more difficult territory.
Yeah.
And the public square is the same thing. It's now, let's not just tolerate each other's presence, but let's actively engage with each other in all of our differences and opinions and perspectives, some of them very deeply held. And I don't want to say unshakable, but more difficult to shake than others. And that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's where you start to have the potential for greater tension and friction.
Yeah.
And I don't want to overstate that. I mean, I think there is constructive engagement that can be ethical, pronounced, and determined, and yet not discordant or unpleasant or worse.
Mm-hmm. So let's just cut to the quick with some of that discomfort. So during the all-day DEIJ workshop, one of the presenters, Ayo Yatunde, spoke to spiritual rot, the core of an organization. Yeah. So my question is two-part. One, how did you interpret her use of that phrase?
Yeah.
And two, how there were some responses to that were definitely made people very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so how would you respond to somebody who maybe felt like that critique was a little too biting or a little too close to home?
Well, I think we all have, Aya has the right to express herself in the way that she sees as appropriate, and everyone who responds to her has the right to respond in the way that each of us thinks is appropriate too. So I'm not here to interpret or qualify or defend or attack Aya, but I will say that what I think she was pointing to was something that she thought this organization should pay attention to. And, these are things around embedded privilege. I think we all have agency. I think one of the things that we espouse at SDI is respecting everybody's agency. So when we are as spiritual companions, spiritual directors, with our companionees or inductees, we respect their agency and their own need to come up with the solutions that are right for them, for each of them. And so I guess what I'm saying in response is that everybody has the right to figure out in response to someone calling attention to some systemic, I don't even want to call it a disorder, but something that they think should be noticed about the community as a whole. Are there certain assumptions behind it that need to be looked at? And then that's a decision that each member needs to make, that each participant in the public square needs to make is, am I ready to look at this? Am I ready to tackle this? Do I want to walk away? Do I want to look away? Do I want to look away and come back after I've had an opportunity to process, right? Everybody has a different processing style, and everybody brings different assumptions and different baggage to a conversation. So my role as the executive director is to try to make as much space for diverse viewpoints as possible without, falling into an unsustainable situation. And that's really what I think engagement with that first word of the DEIJ equation is allowing multiple viewpoints, even when those are in tension with one another. And to model a way to have conversations about very strong differences of opinion sometimes, and very different assumptions about how things should be framed or not framed in a way that's constructive. And that's not, I'll just add that that's not immediately visible, that some things need to linger and we need to discern on them longer, right? I mean, if somebody says, Matt, I know what's wrong with you. This is what's wrong with you. Even if I were 100% right, your initial response would be strong, right? You would either counter what you perceive as an attack, or you would walk away, or you would, dismiss. But if it was asked in the right way, in a gentle way, in a subtle way, or an appropriate way for you, then you might come back and say, that's interesting, I'm going to have to think about it. Or maybe, or yes, but I need to explore it more, right? So certain conversations just need longer time to ferment and for us to process them, particularly if they touch core things in our being, in our psyche that require us to do a lot more processing, like wounds or baggage that we've been carrying for a long time.
Yeah. How do those wounds, how would I recognize them, right? So I can either respond to stay with this, you're critiquing me explicitly.
No, I'm not.
Well, I know
using it as an example.
And if I stay with that example, and say I have thoughts of, wow, I feel bad to learn that those critiques are true, or how dare you talk about me that way, and I become defensive.
Yes.
Right? What should someone do who is sitting with those responses?
Well, so again, I can't answer that question for each person. All I can say is that being as self-aware as possible is good, and entertaining the possibility that we're not right about certain things, and also calling attention when we know something to be wrong. When you've called, say you've called me on something that I know is factually inaccurate, and you've kind of run away to a conclusion with it, then I might, hopefully without losing my temper, hopefully without losing my cool, saying, no, that's not correct. That's not correct. And here's my counter. But at the same time, if there's some truth to what you are saying, then I will either say, I'm ready to engage with this. Let's peel some layers together right now. Or I'm not ready to have this conversation. I accept, I hear what you're saying, but I need time to process it. And so different people are going to have different responses. Now, what's helpful is when you're in a group of people, is you have multiple viewpoints, and usually you have viewpoints that coalesce on some kind of spectrum, right? Where you get a number of people are thinking this about this issue, and a number of people are thinking this out, and that kind of gives you pointers of where the conversation wants to go and what should be explored. It's like, well, in my tradition, I've been taught X. Are you willing to go a little further than that? Are you willing to explore? How do you feel about interfaith dialogue? How do you feel about interspiritual engagement? Are you ready for that? Does your tradition and your perception of it allow for that? Those are some of the questions that I think everyone needs to ask themselves.